Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start with part two of contemporary global concern. The topic is nuclear proliferation. And before going on with this topic, let's have a quick revision of part one. So, nuclear proliferation it is about spread of nuclear weapons, which has become a matter of security to the world. But underlies the construction of the development of nuclear weapons is a technology which can be used in constructive purposes as well. So this constructive purpose is about development of electricity, generation of energy, and the same constructive purpose can be called the civilian use. So the debate is about the civilian versus military use of technology. And since the international sphere is anarchical, we are not sure if any country that is seeking nuclear material for itself, we are not sure if the material is sought for peaceful or the military use. And even if this material was acquired for peaceful purposes, there is no guarantee that it will not be diverted for military use. So this is clearly a case of mistrust here. Now, the countries, especially the powerful, the great powers, when they want to control the spread of nuclear weapons, they have established various policies. So such policies, they present interplay of two sets of issues, the technical and political set, and then the capability and intent of the country concerned. So the technical element, it is about the technical infrastructure, and in that matter, if it is known that a certain country, if it is a rogue element, if this country cannot be trusted, then all the technical facilities, all the apparatus of nuclear assets, they can be denied to such a country. Then the political element. So political component, it is about putting pressure on such country to desist from going nuclear and then provide various incentives and disincentives so that country do not go nuclear. So in short, the meaning of which is that by technical component, a country can be denied or the safeguards can be placed in the supply of nuclear materials. Whereas the political component, which is directly related to trade, economic, and bilateral or multilateral relationship in the international sphere, and herein the views of the opinions of all the trade, economic, multilateral, bilateral partner matter a lot. Then the next element, the capability of a state to go nuclear is dependent on technical component, that is having a nuclear infrastructure. And a nuclear capable state may be technical ripe for nuclear proliferation, which means it has the construction, it has the facilities. But whether it would go nuclear, it is a political intention. Whether it can catch the eye of all of its partner, okay, whether it can go easy with, whether it can withstand all the economic and trade sanctions that that will be followed by such a decision. Now, various incentives are there, such as increased international status, domestic political requirement in case of North Korea versus South Korea, Palestine versus Israel, Iran versus Saudi Arabia. Then it will increase strategic autonomy, and such incentives are there. Then disincentives, such as this will divert resources from development purposes to nuclear program. And since the development of bomb is a long gestation process and inculcate huge amount of resources, this will be a risky trade-off, because by the time a nuclear bomb is developed, your country is going 10 years, not just 10 years, many decades back in the poverty realm. Then you are going to face adverse international and international public opinion. Uh, the conventional security guarantee that were given by some of the great power, they will also be disrupted, and such disincentives are there. Then it is about the technical component, which is the source of fissile material. So this source is a major technical barrier because the source, this nuclear material, is not freely available, and some great power, they have control, they have monopoly over the transportation or the supply of this nuclear fissile material. And to make a bomb, you need highly enriched uranium or plutonium, where in the order of 15 to 25 kilogram of highly enriched uranium or 5 to 8 kilograms of plutonium. Then let's have a look at the evolution of non-proliferation policy. So non-proliferation has emerged via four stages. First, the post-war phase, in which there was secrecy and monopoly was maintained by on the part of the United States. Then there was a liberal policy ushered in by President Eisenhower via Atoms for Peace policy. Then the policy of controls through safeguard came via many treaties, such as Partial Test Ban Treaty, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and finally the reactive phase that came after the Indian Test of 1974. Now let's have a look at U.S. monopoly, the first phase. So the Second World War, during Second World War, the Anglo-Saxon powers, they tried to have a monopoly of making a nuclear bomb before Nazi Germany can. The Soviets were kept out of it. United States, Canada, and Britain, they signed the Quebec Agreement in 1943, in which they decide to keep top level security, top level secrecy. And after the detonation of bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they adopted a comprehensive non proliferation policy towards the rest of the world, which means that the practical application of atomic energy, they will not be disclosed, not even for civilian purposes. Then the first meeting of United Nations Atomic Energy Commission via Baruch Plan and the other Lilienthal report. Both these reports that talk about that the US monopoly over nuclear technology would end sooner or later, that it would be necessary to install mechanism to control the spread of this technology. Or in other words, there was a need of a strong international authority to regulate the commercial development of nuclear energy. So when this proposal could not get through via the United Nations, so the US, it enacted Atomic Energy Act of 1946. So in which the American government, it obtained title of all nuclear facilities in which fissionable nuclear material could be manufactured, and by this act, the US became sole proprietor of all fissionable material. So this monopoly, this strict control, it was viewed by skepticism with the Anglo-Saxon partners such as the Canadians, the British. So they they started on their own nuclear development program. So after the detonation, the fears of both the United Nations reports, the Baruch and Lilienthal report, both of them came true. The major powers of that time, they all started testing their own nuclear weapons. So Soviet, they tested the nuclear weapon in 1944. The British followed in 1952. The French entered the club in 1960, and China in 1964. So with this, the nuclear monopoly, the glass ceiling was shattered. It was the case of mutual mistrust, that all the great power that tested their nuclear weapon, they wanted to keep other countries out of it. And this behavior, it was seen with skepticism, it was seen with suspicion, and this herein led other country to question the monopoly, question the intention of the great powers. Then the second phase of Atoms for Peace. So in 1953, President Eisenhower, he initiated his Atoms for Peace program. So under this proposal, US, Soviet Union and other countries they would contribute fissile material to an agency, International Atomic Energy Agency, which would be responsible for storage and security of this material. And then this agency it would be responsible for providing electrical energy to the world at large. And this program got underway. The agency was established in 1957, and its function was to seek to accelerate and enlarge the contribution of atomic energy for peace, health, and prosperity throughout the world. And for which the four main safeguards were put in place. That this agency it was given the authority to review the design of nuclear facilities elsewhere, the specification of system of records and accounts, specification of system of reports, and the inspection of safeguard facilities to verify compliance with the agreement. So the logic of safeguards here, it became the essential thrust of nuclear policy because the overall issue here for Atoms for Peace program was the same debate around peaceful versus military use, and the liberal policy of American government they wanted to divert the same nuclear material for generation of electricity, but there were also some fear associated with it that the same technology it can lead if it got in the wrong hands can lead to the problem of nuclear proliferation. So via these safeguards, there came two levels of control. The first level of control they came via detection of diversion of nuclear material from civilian to military use. And then the second level was the response to the detection of diversion of nuclear material. So mostly the responses were in terms of economic and trade sanctions or military or political embargoes. And then the third level of control it was laying down restriction on supply of nuclear material. And via this phase, NPT came into function. So NPT, the third phase of nuclear proliferation. So when China entered into the nuclear club in 1964, so this entry it shifted the debate from West versus East, from West versus East to the problem of diversion of material for peaceful from peaceful to weapons use. The meaning of this is that before the entry of China, it was believed that only the Western power can have nuclear weapons, uh, develop nuclear bombs on their own, and the Eastern Hemisphere, Eastern country, these third world countries, they were not seen capable of building any bomb or developing any technology on their own. But when China did this, so now the issue it took another dimension. Now it was not the issue of capability. It was not between developing and developed country. The issue shifted from diversion of material for the intended use to the military weapon development. And finally, the death nail, the nail in the coffin, it came via the Indian test of 1974, which made nuclear non-proliferation a necessity. So the treaty, it it divided the signatory into two categories according to the timeline. 1st January 1967, a cutoff date. So this treaty is divided state into two powers. All the countries that held nuclear weapons before this date, they were known as nuclear states, and those who could not and those who did not, they were known as non-nuclear states or non-weapon state. And there were many safeguards, many restrictions placed on such countries. They were refrained from producing or acquiring nuclear weapons, and in exchange, the weapon state, the nuclear states, they agreed for many conditions such as peaceful uh, technology would be transferred, other non-weapon state would not be assisted, would not be delivered these nuclear weapons, all tests, whether underground, airborne, sea base, all these tests would be discontinued and such and such. But this treaty, it was objected to by many nations, including France, China, and India. And the main concern about the infringement of political sovereignty of a particular state, the violation of sovereignty of a particular state. And in 1995 conference of NPT, this treaty was extended indefinitely. Now let's start with the part 2, supply agreement. So in 1970, shortly after NPT came into force, a number of countries had entered into consultation about procedure and standard to be applied to the export of nuclear fuels and material. The meaning of this is that NPT, it talked about the peaceful use of nuclear energy and the supply of nuclear material, for that matter, for peaceful generation of energy, would be supplied by the NPT, the weapon states. So many countries, they applied for export of nuclear material. So following the Indian test, several countries informed the IAEA, this agency, of their intention to enforce the safeguard on their nuclear exports. So this memorandum included a trigger list of material and item and was to become the first major agreement on supply list of nuclear material. So after the nuclear test, Indian nuclear test in 1974, many countries, they agreed to conditions of International Atomic Energy Agency, and for which all such safeguard would be put in place. Their facilities, they would be inspected, and all the clauses that concern diversion of nuclear material from peaceful to military use, they came into force. And we can club all those conditions, all those agreement as IAEA safeguards. So two major issues were discussed. First, under what condition technology and equipment for enrichment and reprocessing would be transferred to non-weapon state, and whether the transfer are made to states unwilling to submit to a full scope of IAEA safeguards. The meaning of this passage is that still the world at that time, it grappled with two issues. First, since the this NPT and Atoms for Peace program, both of them, they talk about providing or diverting this nuclear material for peaceful use, civilian use, or generation of electricity, generation of energy. So all these states, they were willing to put in those willing to agree to all the safeguard that would be placed by this agreement. But the issue was whether the, the supply of nuclear material to non-weapon state for peaceful use, whether it is feasible and under what condition such nuclear materials should be transferred to non-weapon state for peaceful energy generation. So this was the first issue. And the second issue, if the states who are unwilling to full scope of IAEA safeguards, because if they accept if they want to generate electricity via nuclear material, then IAEA safeguard would be put in place. They are in the facility, all of their nuclear facilities and other conventional facilities, they would be inspected, and their energy generation, it would be regulated, it would be watched over all the time, so that the same material, it it is not diverted from civilian to military use. So the condition came here that what should be the condition under which this nuclear material can be transferred, and if those states, who are unwilling to submit full scope, full watch over, full regulation, what should be done to them. You can take example of Iran, which has recently started, just a few years back, it has started enriching weapon grade uranium. So finally, the nuclear supplier guidelines of the London Club, they included the following. One, nuclear export recipient pledge not to use the transfer material for nuclear explosive of any kind, which means that nuclear, if nuclear material is supplied, it should be used for civilian purpose only. It should not be diverted for nuclear weapons. Second condition, transfer of sensitive nuclear material was to come under the safeguard system, that even if nuclear technology, the sensitive nuclear technology, especially that relate to enrichment of uranium, because it is here that the same enriched uranium or plutonium, it can take two routes here. If it is under safeguard, this critical technology, enrichment of uranium, it can be undertaken in a chain reaction to produce huge amount of energy, and the same energy can be used for generation of electricity. But same enriched uranium, it can be, this technology, it can be diverted for making a bomb. So this is a critical phase here, critical junction in the whole nuclear debate. And even if this nuclear technology would be transferred, such would take place under extreme restraint in case of facilities and would use only low enriched uranium. Highly enriched uranium would be kept out of it, even if the energy generation potential is less, because highly enriched uranium, again, the same point, it can be readily transferred into, readily be made into a nuclear bomb. Then, in the due course, the entire concept of supply group, they came to have a new meaning, with restriction being placed on transfer of dual-use technology under several regimes. In 1987, seven missile technology exporter, they agreed to establish identical export guideline to cover the sale of nuclear-capable ballistic missile. So this regime, known as MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime. So meaning of this paragraph is that when supply group agreed to supply nuclear material but under several restrictions, so many other countries, many other supplier group, they agreed to further guideline or further condition. One of which is in 1987, many seven such missile technology exporter, they agreed to place identical guideline so that nuclear capable ballistic missile, they do not get in the wrong hands. So all in all, you, even if these terms and terminologies as and the facts, they may sound humongous, they may sound intimidating, the ultimate aim of all such safeguard is that the peaceful use should not be diverted for destructive use. And in case of MTCR, such ballistic missile, they do not get in the wrong hand. So it aims at limiting the risk of nuclear proliferation by controlling this transfer of technology which would contribute to nuclear weapons delivery. So the problem here is that the great powers, whoever they are, they have the technology. They have the technology to make a ballistic missile, to make a ballistic missile that is nuclear tipped and which can travel many you can go thousands of kilometers. So Soviets, the French, the British, the Canadians, the Americans, all of them have a ballistic missile that can travel 10,000 kilometers. And even in case of India, we have a ballistic missile that is intercontinental, Agni 5, which means our ballistic missile, it can travel between continents, and the distance thus covered would be in the range of 5,000 kilometers. And we are on the way to develop Agni 10, which is the next generation of intercontinental ballistic missile. They would be able to cover 10,000 kilometers easily, which itself means a powerful nuclear deterrence, a powerful conventional deterrence. Then next in timeline came the 1992 Nuclear Supplier Group Guideline via a meeting in Warsaw that adopted the guideline for transfer of nuclear related dual use equipment, military and related technology. Again, the same thing, plus with some more upgradation, with more stringent restrictions. The third world countries in general has been critical of these restrictive measures placed by this guideline. They argued that after having accepted the NPT, they should have access to nuclear transfer peaceful use. So again, this objection, this criticism was rightfully placed because they have agreed to all the conditions of NPT. They would not be having a nuclear status. They will not test any nuclear weapons, and even if a certain nuclear material is transferred for peaceful use, they are agreed for all the international atomic energy safeguards. Their facilities are open for inspection and monitoring. So why, after agreeing to all the conditions, still more newer generation of restrictive measures are being placed? And why are not they having access to, even after they have agreed to all the acceded to all the conditions, why are not they having the access for access of nuclear material for peaceful use? Now let's have a look at nuclear weapons explosion. The question of nuclear weapon explosion had has been on the international agenda ever since the 1954 Indian proposal called for a standstill on testing, on nuclear testing. So the main treaties that have been concluded in context of nuclear explosion so far, the first one is 1963 PTBT, Partial Test Ban Treaty, the 1974 Threshold Test Ban Treaty, third 1976 Peaceful Nuclear Explosion Treaty, and fourth the 1996 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So the first Partial Test Ban Treaty is a multilateral treaty which prohibit any nuclear explosion, including those for non-military purpose, in the atmosphere, outer space, underwater, or any environment if explosion would cause radioactive debris in any country. So these were the condition of PTBT. Now the Threshold Test Ban Treaty, it was between the United States and Soviet Union, in which both the parties they undertook to prohibit, prevent, and not to carry any underground nuclear explosion tests having a yield exceeding 150 kilotons. So this threshold was about this limiting factor, that no nuclear test exceeding 150 kiloton would be undertaken anywhere by these countries. Then the Peaceful Nuclear Explosion Treaty was also the US and USSR bilateral agreement that sought to regulate the explosion which would be conducted outside the nuclear weapon test site. And finally, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty that look at the most important means to tackle both horizontal and vertical proliferation. That's why this treaty is known as comprehensive one. So it was claimed that by banning all explosions, the CTBT would have constrained the development and qualitative improvement of nuclear weapons, and second, and the development of advanced type of nuclear weapons. Third one, contributed to the process of nuclear proliferation and strengthened international peace and security. The meaning of this passage is the same. Comprehensive means all kinds of nuclear weapons, horizontally, vertically, airborne, seaborne, underground, whether it is of 5 kiloton or 5,000 kiloton, all nuclear explosion would be banned. So the negotiation on the CTBT and the Conference on Disarmament got bogged down on two contention issue of the scope of treaty and verification agreement. The issue of scope came into discussion while the CTBT sought to outlaw all nuclear testing, including the peaceful nuclear tests. So some kind of weapon designing could continue based on subcritical tests and laboratory simulation. So this was the first objection, that it was like the comprehensive, it got a new term, that comprehensive was not that comprehensive, and certain terms and conditions, certain discounts were available, and those discounts were that even if the CTBT it declared all explosion as harmful and declare them banned, yet it provided a leeway for using subcritical tests and laboratory simulation. So these were discounts, or in political term, these were the loopholes that were provided for further testing, for further explosion. So these loopholes were the first objection, because this comprehensive term here, it could not be defined properly. So if it is comprehensive, when all horizontal, vertical, airborne, sea based, marine, all kinds of nuclear weapon, all kinds of nuclear explosion have been banned, if including the peaceful nuclear tests have also been banned, so why are these laboratory simulation, why are these laboratory testings have been continued? So this continuation of laboratory testing, it provided an opportunity to weapon power to retain their weapons stockpile. So this was the loophole that was objected to by many people, that in in this condition, when all the non-weapon state, they have been restricted uh, from any further test which they accept, because they had already accepted the terms and conditions of NPT. They accepted the International Atomic Energy Safeguards. They agreed for all the caveats, agreed for all the stringent norms that would be followed. They have accepted for the peaceful use of nuclear power. Now there here comes another treaty, a comprehensive test ban treaty, and by the very name, by the very title, it outlaws all kinds of nuclear weapons, all kinds of nuclear explosions. But then it gives a backdoor entry to all the great power by by continuing the laboratory testing of nuclear explosion. And herein, it provided a leeway so that the weapon stockpile hoarded and accumulated by the great power, it would be retained. So this was objection. This was the first objection, and then there were some verification arrangement. This was which formed the second class of objections. So the second objection was verification, focus on agency that was to monitor the implementation, because merely signing the treaty, merely signing uh, the agreements of this treaty, they are not going to outlaw all nuclear testing. There is a need of an agency which would monitor if the terms and conditions of this treaty are being implemented. So here the objection was that the nature of the agency who is going to monitor this implementation. So if it were a national agency, then it would constitute an intrusion on the sovereignty of a country, and besides the attendant biases of the country. Again, the objection, it is very clear which agency is going to monitor the implementation of this treaty. So it can be an international agency like International Atomic Energy Agency, or some national agency of any particular country. Now, if an international agency is being given the right to monitor the implementation of this treaty, it would be an intrusion of the sovereignty of a country. The same thing happened with a national agency as well. Any national agency by name of, you can say, CTBT agency of any country. If it is given the right to monitor the implementation of this particular treaty, first, this first and foremost, the objection here is it would be a biased report, it would be a biased monitoring, because no country would report the violation of this treaty to the international public. So herein, it's like non-weapon state, they uh, do not have any nuclear weapons. Let's talk about, for example, Brazil or Argentina, these two countries. Now, both of them, they do not have nuclear weapons. Now, the world, it calls on them to accede to the terms and conditions of this treaty, CTBT, which they readily acceded to. Now the CTBT calls for another condition that they would such monitoring would be taken place, and this monitoring would be in form of a national agency of Argentina itself. So Argentina, they say, we do not have any nuclear weapon, and now if any national agency is going to undertake inspection of all the conventional uh, weapon sites, conventional military facilities, it would be an invasion, because that agency is going to produce a report that would be tabled before the high powers. So this is an invasion of privacy. Now, if the same country is the US, now a US national agency would undertake such a monitoring, and that report, we all know without any hiccup that this report would not be unbiased. The US agency would do as its master says. So we no country is going ever to arrive at the actual implementation of this treaty. So this was the second objection put in by the many countries of the world. Then in 1995, India, it objected and said that the signing of this treaty can happen in a time-bound global disarmament program. And herein, India maintained that five nuclear weapon states, they agree on a timetable for total removal of nuclear weapons as a precondition to its acceptance. Which means if the five nuclear weapons, the five uh, members of Security Council, if they agree to dismantle all of their nuclear weapons, then this treaty it can be accepted. And this proposal was placed in UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, as a resolution, and finally passed in 1996 as a UN resolution. Then the key issue was that the fear that nuclear weapons power sought to maintain a status quo on number of nuclear weapon states. They were seen as a state that sought to deny the non-weapon state the legitimate aspirations. And the eventual nuclear testing of India and Pakistan in 1998 and their entry into nuclear club was an assertion of this position. The meaning of this passage is that this debate around CTBT, it revolved around those two issues. The first, the verification agreement, and second, the loophole. And by this loophole, it became clear that even if the CTBT it talks about comprehensive test ban, comprehensive ban on horizontal and vertical nuclear explosion, it also provided a discount, a leeway, a loophole, so that the major powers they retain their nuclear stockpile. So ultimately, the CTBT, in the minds of international public, it acted as an IWAS, so that all the powers of the world they would be inspected of their facilities if they contain their nuclear material, if they contain any, if they undertake any nuclear explosion. And in another way, it was an stop, uh, a restriction that is placed on non-weapon states so that they could never never test any nuclear weapon in the future. Whereas on the other side, the nuclear powers they have already tested their nuclear weapons and they have their stockpile, and this was retained via this leeway. And then another IWAS was in terms of verification agreement, which was that the powers they have already they do possess their nuclear weapons, and their national agency is going to undertake the monitoring of the implementation, which would again be a IWAS, a bias report, and nobody is going to know if the comprehensive test ban treaty it walked on its words. Now let's have a look at nuclear arms limitation. So, an important dimension of discussion on nuclear proliferation is the understanding of perception and policies of nuclear weapons power, especially the US and the USSR. What have been their strategies? What have they done to reduce the nuclear tension among themselves? And nuclear doctrines, it defines the role of nuclear weapons in both deterring and waging nuclear war. So this is about nuclear arms limitation. So the debate around arms limitation, the banning of explosive, the restriction on supply of nuclear material, um, the implementation of nuclear non-proliferation, all of them, they started with the arms race between the US and the USSR. So when we look at the historical angle, we are going to start with what both of these powers have done to reduce the tension. What both these power had done to fuse the tensions, because still both these countries, they hold around 10,000 to 11,000 nuclear weapons, just these two countries. So let's have a look at nuclear doctrines. The United States believe that the vague threats of use of nuclear weapons forced North Korea and China to negotiate table in the Korean War. So the policy of deterrence evolved in the 1950 was a security doctrine of the United States. So the ultimate aim of developing nuclear weapon, it is the nuclear deterrence, which is the presence of the possession of nuclear weapons. It act as a deterrent so that other country do not take you for granted and do not think about invading your country via any military means. And US also believed that because of having nuclear weapons and because the threat of use of nuclear weapons, it forced North Korea and China to the negotiating table in the Korean War. So this was the beginning of policy of deterrence, which started just a few years after the detonation of nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then the US declared the intention to retaliate instantly by means and places of its choosing. So the nuclear policy of the US, it was articulated its policy as nuclear deterrence by threat of massive retaliation in 1954. This is the nuclear policy, nuclear deterrence policy of the US, which can be clubbed simply as a threat of massive retaliation. And even India's no first use policy, it walks on the same line. We have also the same nuclear deterrence policy by which we would not use the nuclear weapon in the first place. But if we are attacked, even if it is via conventional weapons, then we hold the right for massive nuclear retaliation. So this was the deterrence, nuclear deterrence policy that is heart of this nuclear proliferation. So this deterrent is the core of nuclear strategy, and the key function of military establishment nuclear is not to win war but to avert them. Yes, this particular line, it beautifully captures the whole issue of nuclear proliferation. That after having seen the devastation after First World War and Second World War, all the major powers, all the international public, they seek to avoid war at all cost. Because in war there are no winners, all losers. Both side loses billions of dollars and thousands of people, including the civilian one. So the best way out, it is to avert them. And even we have seen via the recuperation, the redevelopment of the war devastated country via Marshall Plan, and we have seen that it takes a long time for any country to rise up from the debris of such military devastation. So the best possible way is to avert them, and this aversion can happen only if you have a powerful deterrence, and nuclear weapons act as a powerful deterrence. Now let's have a look at various treaty for arm limitation. So this ABM Treaty in 1969, US and USSR initiated bilateral negotiation on possible restriction on the strategic nuclear arsenal, which means nuclear stockpiles. So the first agreement in the first phase was Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, SALT 1. It was Treaty on Limitation of Anti-Ballistic Missile System. So this ABM treaty, it prohibits the deployment of anti-ballistic missile system for the deterrence of territories of United States and Soviet Union. So this treaty has provided two specific areas where ABM system can be deployed in the country, and eventually this was reduced to one area. The treaty prohibits the development, testing, and deployment of mobile ABM system and components, including those that are sea, air, land-based, or space-based. The meaning of this paragraph is that via this treaty, anti-ballistic missile system, it banned the deployment of, outlines the deployment of ABM system anywhere comprehensively. Then the SALT agreement. So the first SALT agreement, which is the Strategic Armed Limitation Treaty Agreement, it was on limiting offensive strategic arms, signed and came into force at the Moscow Summit of 1972. This agreement sets limits on the number of strategic ballistic launchers of both US and USSR for a period of 5 years. After the completion of 5 years, these countries continue to observe the provisions of this interim agreement and more specific limitation on ICBM and SLBM. So ICBM is intercontinental ballistic missile, and SLBMs are sea and land-based ballistic missile. So the meaning of this one is that all such strategic arms, especially missiles, ballistic launchers, they have been outlined for a period of 5 years, and then the policy was continued for a long time. And this agreement, it put limitation on the use of both ICBMs and SLBMs. And following the success of SALT 1 agreement, they adopted a new framework and negotiated on the next phase of SALT agreements known as SALT 2, that was signed in 1979. But in that year 1979, Afghanistan, Soviet Union, it militarily intervened in Afghanistan, and because of which the relation between both the countries that deteriorated, and this agreement, it could not be ratified. Now the INF Treaty. So the SALT agreement, it limited only the long range ground and sea based ballistic missiles, and both US and USSR, they continue to develop and deploy intermediate and short range missiles. So this INF Treaty, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, it concerns the type of delivery vehicles to be covered by limitations, the geographical coverage of such limitation, the involvement of third party, and stringency of verification measures. So this treaty, it was signed in 1987, covering the intermediate range and short range missiles, and it was applicable to all American Soviet missiles in Europe and Asia, but excluded British and French armaments. So the meaning of this passage is that SALT 1 agreement, it talks about long range missiles, strategic arms, ballistic missiles, are ultimately of long range. So long range missiles, both ICBMs, SLBMs, they were outlawed, but there were no treaty about intermediate and short range missile. So this loophole, it was covered up by signing of this treaty, INF Treaty, which is Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces. And this treaty, it outlawed all American and Soviet missile in Europe and Asia. And even if it eliminated only a small fraction of nuclear delivery vehicle, it is significant because it successfully eliminated an entire category of missile system. Because this particular treaty, INF Treaty, it reduced all intermediate and small delivery vehicles. Delivery vehicle here means missiles, because missile, any nuclear material, if it is to deploy it to another place, it needed to be delivered via some mechanism, or delivered via some delivery system, and these delivery system are usually many missiles. So long range missiles, they are usually of ballistic nature. Ballistic means they move like a bullet moves, that is a recoiling motion. So this recoiling motion, it is known as ballistic motion. And recoiling motion, as you know, it makes a big dent in in the enemy territory, a deep dent in the enemy territory, just like a bullet when tearing human flesh, it still keeps going, still keeps pushing inside, it still keeps penetrating deep. So the same mechanism was used in ballistic missiles. But the for shorter ranges such as 150 kilometer, 200 kilometer, 500 kilometer, there comes intermediate and short range missile. So this INF Treaty, it successfully eliminated all such short range and intermediate range nuclear missiles. Now let's have a look at the next range of limitation agreement, the START agreements. So in 1991, almost after a decade of negotiation, the US and USSR, they concluded a treaty on reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms, which is subsequently called START 1 Treaty, Strategic Arm Reduction Talks. This treaty provides deep cuts into arsenal of two powers, but unlike the INF, it does not provide for elimination of any specific category of weapon system. Then this treaties were followed by START 2 in 1993. So both START first and START second, both of them, they were about reducing strategic arms. So all strategic arms such as long range missile, ballistic missiles, intermediate and short range missiles, or ABM system, all kinds of strategic means those arms that are considered powerful, powerful by the in terms of devastation they can make, or the distance they can cover. In both the nature, they act as powerful deterrent. That's why they are called strategic. So START agreement, it talk about reduction of arms on mutual terms, and it has been maintained that these agreements further reduce the risk of nuclear war because the political impact of dramatic cuts in the nuclear inventory of the superpowers. So here, nuclear inventory, nuclear arsenal, they were reduced by considerable margins. Now, 2 points need to be made about approaches of the US and USSR about their position. First, the central concern that prompted the two countries to undertake a series of negotiation was the fear of nuclear war that would be detrimental to the world at large. Because at the peak of the nuclear race between them, both of them, they held 6,000 nuclear weapons each. And in even in contemporary time, both of them, they hold around 5,000 nuclear weapons each. But because of many such arms limitation treaties, the stockpile, it has been reduced. The the count on delivery vehicle, what we are seeing now, it it is mostly about delivery vehicles such as the ballistic missiles, the anti-ballistic system, various nuclear carriers, all of them. The quantity is somehow same because any delivery system, without its fuel, it is nothing, and it means nothing. A delivery fuel can also hold conventional ammunition, but we are talking, our core concern is about nuclear weapons. So by strategic reductions, the both of these countries, they have made deep cuts in their nuclear inventories. The stockpile, it has reduced, and all in all, you can say that this earlier they used to have megatons of nuclear material in their arsenal, which in present time They have only a few such missiles that can hold megatons of nuclear materials. So my point was, at the time, a megaton of nuclear bomb, it can kill the whole middle-sized country. And at the peak of the nuclear race between US and USSR, the amount of nuclear weapons held by them, it became clear that even because of misunderstanding, if these powerful weapons are fired, if they are deployed, they they were able to extinguish life on Earth many times. So these were the core concern about the fear of nuclear war. Then, from a third world perspective, the nuclear weapon state took a status quo position on the world order and based on capability of nation determined by its nuclear status. So if a third world country wanted a space in decision making apparatus, they would have to get that space through a demonstration of nuclear power capability. So again, the another element of this uh, the arms reduction, arms limitation between the US and USSR, it had a third world angle here. So third world countries, especially countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, so they knew this reality that if they want to have any space in decision making about arms reduction, about nuclear non proliferation, they needed to grab that space. They need to grab that decision making power first by demonstrating their own nuclear power capability. So China did it in 1964, followed by India in 1974 and 1998, which were also followed by Pakistan in both the instances. North Korea is one such example. So all these countries, they did follow, they did demonstrate their nuclear capability for the same reason, that it is the deterrence that will provide them uh, a space at the high table. Now let's have a look at developing countries and the arms reduction. So denuclearized zones. So idea of establishing nuclear weapons zones in populated area of world was conceived with a view to extend the purview of nuclear non-proliferation and ensure that new states do not go in for nuclear weapons. Because if you create such a state, such a zone where nuclear weapons would not be used, then there would not be any need for any non-nuclear state to go nuclear. The motive was to remove the regional security pressure for a country to opt for nuclear weapons. The same thing. If any non weapon state does not have any such compelling security pressure to opt for nuclear weapons, then they will not opt for it. So these zones had another asset. They not only prevented the country of reasons from going nuclear, they also proscribed the entry of weapons in the area. So these were the two reasons for which many areas were denuclearized. Because first, non-weapon state would not seek nuclear weapons or the status of a nuclear weapon, and then other weapons would not enter these areas. So the agreements that followed the establishment of denuclearized zones were following. First, the Treaty of Tlatelolco in 1967 that covered Latin American, then the Treaty of Rarotonga that covered South Pacific regions, the Declaration of Denuclearization of Korean Peninsula in 1992. And now let's have a discussion about the relation between India and Pakistan. So the debate during CTBT negotiations had identified India, Pakistan, and Israel as threshold power that had capability to produce a nuclear bomb. And some other countries of concern were also included, such as Iraq, North Korea, South Africa. Then, following the Gulf War of 1991, the question of Iraq's compliance with the NPT became a matter of grave concern for nuclear power. the efforts made to send a team of International Atomic Energy Agency inspector to verify the Iraqi compliance, and this team, this effort, it was met with resistance, and it was only after this resistance that the U.S. it invaded Iraq uh, in 2003. Then North Korea has also been put under severe pressure by the United States to ensure that it does not proceed with nuclear weapons and missile development program. Then India and Pakistan, both of them, they conducted nuclear tests in 1998. So much of the debate it focused on security consideration of this action, the regional threat dimension, internal political compulsion, and the problem of proliferation. At one level, these tests constitute a symbolism of third world defiance, but at another, they present a challenge to policies of international nuclear non proliferation. Because the whole issue of India and Pakistan, it added another element to the issue of nuclear proliferation. Since both of these countries, they are they are at breathneck distance. They are very uh, geographically they are very close to each other, and both of them they have antagonistic relationship. And in that scenario, when the whole world, when the great powers, they are talking about the, they're reducing the proliferation of nuclear materials, they are reducing their own arms, but at the other another hand, two third world countries, they are seeking their own ambition, they are making their weapons and they are testing them in in public, and this created another level of security challenges. It was not just a matter of defiance, it was also a matter of nuclear non-proliferation, because if these two countries, if they keep on testing nuclear explosion just in the name of nuclear weapons. As you know, both these countries they hold around 140 and 160 nuclear weapons. So 300 nuclear weapons are coveted by these two countries. And these 300 weapons are more than enough to destroy 30 times over. Then the next paragraph. So over the year, the issue of nuclear and related technology like space and electronics had come to symbolize the core of developed world's status quo agenda. The NPT regimes, with its multifarious dimension like Nuclear Supply Group, MTCR, FMCT, it had sought to place the P5 nuclear powers in a monopolistic managerial framework. Then this problem was compounded by restraint placed on dual-use technology. The key threat to national security as articulated by a technologically advanced country and developing world came to focus on these restraint of G7 regime. The meaning of this passage was that the earlier, after the Second World War was over, the, the nuclear technology, nuclear weapon, all of them, they were monopolized by Western powers, and they did not believe in the capability of third world country to acquire such a weapon or to develop such a technology by their own. So all of them, they kept the nuclear technology to themselves, they monopolized it and kept all other countries out of its ambit. But gradually, when other countries also started demonstrating their nuclear capabilities, such as France, Britain, Canada, Australia, and followed by China, and ultimately it was the Indian test in 1974 which opened their eyes. So the status quo agent that talked about here was that only the Western power could hold such nuclear weapon because they considered them civilized, they considered them sane enough to hold such a nuclear weapon in their arsenal. And it also, they consider it a matter of responsibility, a matter of prestige. But this status quo, it also had another dimension that if they have coveted this nuclear weapon in the arsenal, all other countries should be kept out from possessing it. So this was the ultimate status quo agenda. But the three tests, the Chinese test of 1964, the Indian test of 1974, and subsequent Pakistani test, all of these tests, they opened their eyes, and therein followed the anti-status quo approach. The May 1998 test, it represents the defined independence at an age when the nuclear regime had become more stringent over the years. So, if we if we say there that China tested its nuclear weapon in 1964, but at that time the norms for safeguarding nuclear proliferation were not that strict, and the whole regime was still in the making. But when all such safeguards were put in place and the issue around the nuclear testing, it became more strict over the years, the May 1998 test, the Indian test, which was subsequently followed by Pakistani test in the same year, it represented a new age that more stringent, more strict norms, they cannot stop from any country to going nuclear. The indefinite extension of NPT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the Wassenaar Arrangement on Export Control for Dual Use Technology, and the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty, they represented a new era of global management. In all such new treaties, they talk about the same thing, that nuclear material would be exported, and they realize it that the status quo could not be maintained. Any country, whether rich or poor, whether from first or third world, any country can acquire nuclear weapon by their own, and no country can stay defiant, can stay restrained for a long time. So for that matter, they started exporting nuclear material for peaceful use. Then the Iraqi, the Korean effort, the North Korean effort, they also represented another kind of defiance. So then the Israeli method of quietly building a nuclear facility, nuclear capability under the American umbrella, it represented another approach. So the Indian test of May 1998, it came to represent a demonstration of capability, technological and political, of third world countries. So the political capability, it represented the demonstration of political will of the elite to take on the G7 regime. So when India demonstrated another nuclear test in 1998, the political dimension, the political demonstration was that the G7 regime, the advanced, powerful, Western, rich countries, these the country which also held some of the P5 members, some of the nuclear power state, and everyone, all the countries, they knew this thing, that if they demonstrate their capability, if they test nuclear weapon, then sanctions, arm embargoes, trade embargoes, various such restrictions would be placed on them. The economies are going to suffer. But still, when a third world country, it made an attempt or demonstrated its capability, it was the political demonstration of its will to defy the rules of G7 regime. So it is this reassertion of this ability to take independent decision in face of anticipated sanctions that make the nuclear test a symbol of a resurgent third world. So this 1998 test, it also was symbolic, political symbol of defiance of the third world, that they knew that sanction would follow, and that they would be opposed by the advanced and developed economies of the world. Still, they made the decision. So the problem of nuclear proliferation, it did not start with the Indian test of 1974. It arose with the first atomic bomb dropped over Japan in 1945. And this problem became complicated when the US monopoly of nuclear technology ended in the years. So in the 1960s, the acuteness of this problem was recognized when an underdeveloped third world country, China, entered the exclusive club of nuclear power. And then the year 1968 therefore marks the first institutional step in fight for exclusivity. The NPT regime in 1968 had continued to retain its hold through new century. Anyway, now I look at nuclear proliferation today. So the Indian and Pakistani tests they have been identified as a major setback to efforts at non-proliferation, and both of them they are still not stopping. And even Indian, the uh, the largest democracy of world, India, it can toe the line, it can walk the line espoused by the international opinion. Pakistan and North Korea, they are the rogue actor that need to be restrained in this time. No state had openly joined the nuclear club in several decades. The membership of NPT had grown and has now become a permanent agreement. And the South Asian state that had not been considered a rogue state by international community. So, all in all, the nuclear non-proliferation it has worked many extent, up to much extent, and the membership for NPT it has grown. No other state other than North Korea has openly tested its nuclear weapon, and in short, the world is largely non-nuclear, but again there are many hiccups here. This open nuclearization it was complicated by situation in Iraq and North Korea. The next paragraph, if avoiding the spread of nuclear weapon is the objective of weapon state, they have failed to implement their share of responsibility. Now it is analysis if world has gone non-nuclear, if nuclear proliferation policy has worked. So if we look at if all these nuclear non-proliferation policy, they had avoided if they had stopped the spread of nuclear weapons, then they have failed to implement this responsibility. If at the end of Cold War both the US and Russia had undertaken to reduce their own nuclear arsenal with vigor, then they may have conveyed a more positive message for non-proliferation. Further, both Washington and Moscow need to devalue the nuclear weapons by downgrading their own security policies. Until 2000, the Russians had embraced nuclear weapons in their military doctrine to compensate for the seriously weakened state of conventional forces. So, the suggestion here is that uh, the spread of nuclear weapons it has not reduced, it not stopped to the extent sought by it, but yet it had worked up to a certain extent. And furthermore, the various bilateral level reductions, mutual reductions happened between US and Russia. They have that thing that measures of non-proliferation that they have helped. They have conveyed a good message to the world, um, but more is needed to be done. And the one front in which both the countries can help the world is via downgrading their own nuclear policies. If they downgrade the nuclear status to the extent that nuclear weapons would not be placed in their military doctrines, which is they give more place to conventional weapons, conventional ammunition, and nuclear weapons would be sidelined if they are sidelined to the extent that they are only weapons of last resort. So this downgrading it will also give further impetus to nuclear non-proliferation. Now let's have the status of global nuclear warheads. So in 2024, Russia had 5,580, North Korea 50 nuclear weapons, China 500, India 172, Pakistan 170, Israel 90, France 290, United Kingdom 225, and United States 5044. So you can see here, both these countries, they have around 11,000 nuclear weapons. And we, even if we forget all the other inventories, just inventories of Israel would be enough to wipe all forms of life from this earth. So this is the ultimate inventory of the world. And yes, finally, I would like to highlight this fact, this suggestion, that nuclear weapons, they have inflated in their approach. They have been inflated in their status just because the US detonated its bomb in 1945, and devastation was seen by it. But the same devastation can also happen by any conventional weapon if they are taken in multitude and taken in manifold. So my point is here that if you want to reduce the coveted position taken in by nuclear weapons, then first thing you should do is to downgrade its value from the weapons of first resort to the weapons of last resort, and place conventional weapon on the front line. This will this will act as a deterrent, and it will also give an incentive to other countries for not going nuclear. So this is it. Thank you very much.